Here's a full lower body calisthenics body weight routine that you can follow once or twice a week to build some crazy lean muscle and obviously work towards some of those lower body calisthenics skills. This is designed so you can follow it for weeks to months to years and obviously progress through each variation as you're starting to build that strength. And this is something I've followed for the last couple years and seen some pretty insane results. Same with a lot of my clients as well. And obviously the best part about it, we don't need any equipment at all. I've just got some bars here that are used for assistance, but you can just use a chair, a table, absolutely anything to hold on to. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. So quickly, obviously we're going to have to do a warm up and we'll breeze through this in about 5 minutes, but what we're trying to do here is to just get these joints firing, as a lot of these calisthenic skills do place a lot of load through these joints, especially through your knees too. So what we're starting with, if we're trying to get some hip rotations here, what you want to focus is trying to keep your torso forward and make all the movement happening at your hips. So you'll see here I'm facing forward and the only thing that's moving is my actual hip joint with my knee trying to touch the floor, and we're getting a nice stretch through those internal and external rotators. Save 30 seconds for this as well. And now quickly we're moving into, I think they call this the best stretch ever. It actually is the best stretch ever, but we're getting into a bit of a lunge position here. Make sure you're straightening that back leg out here too. And we're rotating up, and we're also watching my hand as well lift over, and we're coming back down, and then we're doing the other side. And you'll see here my gaze is following that hand, as I said. So I'm rotating my torso with my arm. And we're doing about 10 reps of these on either side. So now we're moving on to a simple quad stretch, but we don't want to be holding this. We want to quickly move in and out of these holds. So we're holding it for a good second, dropping it back down, holding it for a second, dropping it back down. You want to think about really trying to bring your knee down as well. So you're not holding it here, as that's not stretching too much. You want to drive that knee down to the opposite leg, so we're really stretching the hip flexors as well as those quads too. All right, so now we're working our way down the leg, and we're probably doing the most important stretch of this actual session or this warm up, and we're doing some ankle dorsiflexion. So we're trying to drive our knee as far forward as we can while keeping the heel on the actual ground. And you want to use your weight to lift yourself kind of forward and place your chest on that knee or your thigh and drive forward, as I said, while keeping the heel on the ground. And we're holding that for about 15 to 20 seconds. And we're also doing a couple sets of these. So do 15 to 20 seconds on both sides and go through twice. All right, so now that we've worked through the mobility, what we're gonna try and do now is really get some muscle activation going and priming a lot of those muscle groups that are gonna be kind of a key part of the following exercises. So firstly, glute activation, super important. So here we're trying to drive our hips up into the air, squeezing your glutes as high as we can and controlling it back down. If this is too easy for you, by all means, you can go for a single leg variation and try keep your knee in line with that other knee as you drive your hips up, squeezing at the top, and controlling it back down. Aim for about 8 to 12 reps, and obviously on both sides. And if you're doing the double-legged, try and get to about 20 reps and really get those glutes firing. And last warm-up exercise, we're doing some forward lunges with a bit of a twist here. So what we're trying to do is we're gonna lunge forward, and we're gonna try and drive our knee as far forward as you can, similar to that ankle dorsiflexion stretch that we're doing, driving that knee forward, coming back up and doing a fair few reps of those, trying to get about 8 to 12 reps on either side. So warm-up's done, let's get stuck into the session. We've got 6 exercises to go through. Let's go. So first exercise, we are starting a pistol squat variation here, and there's 5 variations that you'll be working through over the weeks to months. The first 2, we're using some form of assistance. As I said, you can just use a chair. You do not need one of these bars as well. And then the next 2 will be using no assistance. And then the last one, we can add some weight. You don't have to use dumbbells, don't have to use barbells. You can use any form of weight that you can find in your home. So the first variation we're working through is a half assisted pistol squat. So we're trying to get down half, or at least as deep as that you can go, and coming back up. Making sure that you're trying to keep your chest proud and you're maintaining that upright torso as best as you can while shifting that knee forward. Super important here. And if you're struggling with these, it's very likely because you're lacking ankle mobility and you're not shifting your knees further forward. So that warm-up's gonna help, and it could be something you incorporate into your workout routine a little bit more frequently. Making sure you're doing the other side too. The second variation, obviously trying to get as deep as we can now too. So here, we're trying to get all the way down to that full range of motion and then coming back up. Once again, trying to stay as upright as you can. If you're kind of hunched over like this and really struggling, it's not gonna be great for your lower back, and it also doesn't look very good too. So try and maintain that upright torso as best as you can and then come back up. So now we're getting rid of the assistance and we're trying to get as deep as we can with just our body weight. So here, you might get to that half position and that'll be that third variation. Continue building your strength on these. And then the next variation, we're obviously trying to get into that full pistol squat here. And if you can do this, congratulations, you've unlocked the pistol squat. But as I said, it's the exact same in terms of the form. You're just trying to stay as upright as you can while also flexing this leg to make sure that that's not touching the ground. Heads up, you can also cheat a little bit here, and you can wear shoes that have a little bit more of a heel in it, or you can place a little bit of some form of plate underneath your heels to give that artificial ankle mobility, and it actually does make it a whole lot easier. So the next hardest variation, as you can see, I just grabbed some books over here, but what you want to try and do is get it into your midline, so underneath your chest, and then we're doing pistol squats with some form of weight. As I said, if you have dumbbells, if you have barbells, that works well too. This is obviously a tough variation though. 4 to 6 reps, getting a really nice balance of both strength and size here. And we're obviously doing 3 sets either side of these ones too. Let's get stuck into exercise 2. Second exercise, we are moving on to sissy squat variations here. So once again, we're using that chair, table, whatever you have access to for assistance. Similar sets, similar rep range, and we're also working through 4 of these variations as well. So the very first one, just as similarly, we're going down into half assisted sissy squat. So we're just trying to get as deep as our mobility and our strength allows us to, and over time obviously trying to get that little bit deeper. For all of these variations, in terms of the technique, what you have to make sure you're focusing on is my hips are staying completely extended the whole time. As I'm coming down and my knees start to shift forward, I'm also coming onto my toes, shifting my knees forward, but as my knees shift forward, my torso follows in the opposite way. So I'm not coming down like this and flexing like that and coming forward, looks absolutely ridiculous. And something you also see very often is when you're coming up, your hips flex. We do not want that. We want to try and keep your glutes engaged, coming onto your toes, shift the hips forward, and then shift back up in the exact same movement pattern. And obviously as you're moving to the second progression and you start to get that depth, you want to try and get your knees to touch the ground, or at least very close to it, and then coming back up. Definitely a tough exercise, this one, and it requires a lot of conditioning through those knees. So slowly work through those in the coming weeks. And then in terms of the progressions, which I probably can't even do at the moment, I stuffed my ankle up, but obviously we're trying to get as deep as we can without any form of assistance. Eventually get into a point where we can touch our knee to the ground. Try and get both knees to the ground. My ankle is absolutely stuffed. If you are feeling extra adventurous, you can do a 5th variation, add some weight to that as well. See how you go. So third exercise now, and we are doing a hamstring curl variation. I lied about the equipment. We do need more equipment. We do need socks, or at least for the variation we're doing at the moment. Some of you may not need this, but what we're doing is hamstring curls, and we're just gonna use this just so we have less friction, so we can slide our legs down and back up with this variation. If you can't do that, it's totally fine. You can just use normal carpet or walls and just slowly incrementally walk your feet down and back up. However, the first variation we're doing is half hamstring curl slides. So you're trying to get as deep as you can, similarly like we've done with the rest of them, and coming back up. What we have to make sure we're doing with all of these variations for the hamstring curls, our hips do not sag down. Our hips are staying at the top of that glute bridge the whole time, and we're trying to get as deep as we can and then come back up. And as you start to progress and you move to the harder variations, you're trying to get as deep as you can, but trying to keep those hips up. You see how I'm not resting down at the bottom and then coming back up and sliding while keeping those legs up. This is a tough exercise. Obviously, as I said, if you can't slide or find some form of frictionless way to do it, you can even use a skateboard. It's one way to do it. Then if you can't obviously do that, do it against the wall. And then in terms of the next hardest progression, so what we can start working toward now are Nordic curl variations. So use some form of leg assistance if you can. You can get someone to hold your legs and do this. And all you have to do here is just try and get as deep as you can while keeping your hips straight. It's a very tough exercise. Work through this as you go, and obviously make sure you're competent with the hamstring curls before you give that Nordic curl variation a crack. Just keep that negative as slow as you possibly can, and obviously get as deep as you can while keeping those hips relatively straight. And hopefully eventually you can get a Nordic curl one day too. Fourth exercise now, we are doing a couple sets of reverse Nordic curls with this one. So similar to how we've been doing for the previous ones. By the way, I suck at these at the moment because of my ankle, so I apologize. Normally I am a little bit better at these, but what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get as deep as we can in this reverse Nordic until eventually we can kind of get as deep as we can where we're touching our back to the floor. First variation is obviously more or less a quarter reverse Nordic, and then coming down, trying to eventually get to a point where we can progress to the next one where we're getting into a half reverse Nordic. And then maybe even the third hardest variation, a 3/4 reverse Nordic. Obviously being smart with the tempo too, we're not rushing this back and coming back up. And the same thing with the sissy squats. I don't want to see you doing these ones. So do not flex at your hips. Make sure those hips are staying extended and you're squeezing your glutes like you're at the top of a glute bridge. And then eventually get to a point where you can get as much depth as you can possibly allow. That's all I can do at the moment. But obviously try and get that lower back to touch that ground. That's where you want to be progressing toward. So fifth exercise, we are working through a bit more of a superset now to get a little bit more load through the glutes and the hamstrings, and obviously that posterior chain, so the back of our legs now as well. So we're starting with arabesques, and with these arabesques, you just want to make sure they're nice, slow and controlled. If you need to use some form of assistance, by all means use some form of assistance, but what we have to make sure we're doing, as my other leg shifts back, I also have my torso shifting forward, and they're staying on like a perpendicular plane. So imagine that there's like a rope or a rod that's between my heel and the top of my head. And as my leg shifts back, my torso just has to follow that same path. So imagine there's a nice straight line shifting as my leg kicks back, my torso also shifts back. However, what you have to make sure you're doing is you do not want to be shifting onto one side and bringing your hips in or out. You have to make sure your hips are level as you go down and up. So keep those hips in line with each other. So perform 8 to 12 reps either side of those arabesques and then jump straight into 8 to 12 reps of single leg glute bridges. Same thing in the warm up in terms of the technique. Keep those knees stationary together, and then we're driving our hips up as high as we can, squeezing the glutes and controlling it back down. Obviously making sure you're doing both sides, as I said. Final exercise, we are doing a single leg calf raise. What you have to make sure you have is just any form of step. I'm using a little box here or a little block, but just any form of steps, stairs, whatever you can get access to. You can even use books to kind of give you that range of motion. And then from here, we're doing as many reps as we possibly can, making sure we're getting as much of a stretch at the bottom and coming up as high as we possibly can, and repping out as many reps as possible. First with your opposite leg, and then moving into your main leg, which you should be doing with every exercise as well. Always start with your weaker leg and match the reps. Oh, I can't actually do that with my left calf. Oh. So that is the full lower body calisthenics program. You can see the workout on your screen now. As I said, I'd suggest following this once or twice a week. Progress through the variations over weeks and months, and watch your strength skyrocket and that lean muscle mass through your legs build over time. I also have a free calisthenics community that you can join with programs, courses. Obviously, there's a community there for feedback and all the motivation you ever need. I don't know why, if you've come this far, I don't know why you wouldn't join it. It's completely free, as I said. Click that link below, like, subscribe, all the rest of it. Have a good one.